I have fallen into my fade and I can't get out. Honey. Honey. Somebody. Anybody.
I told you this would happen.
Hi, welcome back to Katrina's Creations Knitting Podcast. If you're a new viewer, thank you for stopping by. If you are a return viewer, thank you for coming back. And if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. And let's just jump into it because I've got lots of things to share with you today. I only have one finished object, as you saw in the intro. That was my husband helping me unwrap myself from my fade. We measured it out and it's about 8 feet long. We were afraid we couldn't even get it into the screen. But I did finish it, but that's the only thing I knitted on all week. So let me show you how far I got. Here is where I was last week. This is like the tail end part. Then I got in and knitted all of this. And all the way down to there. So if I held it out lengthwise, I knitted from here to here this week. But it was like everything, every time I sat down I was knitting. So the whole thing, I'll work my way across with it. Going here. There you go. And wouldn't you know, I knew this would happen. I finished it, and now it's too hot to wear it. Our temperatures are supposed to go up to 90 this next week. And it already feels like it's that hot up in my craft room. If I look a little sweaty, it's because I am. If you remember last week, my husband and I were trying to put window air conditioners in. We're still trying to put window conditioners in. We have to get brackets to hold them because when we put them in through the window, there was literally this much, keeping them from toppling out the window and into the backyard. So we decided not to do that, you know. Didn't want to throw them out the second story windows. So it's a little warm up here. But anyway, I have some exciting news to share with you. If you watch, there's a podcast called Must Love Yarn. They were doing a giveaway for their 1,000 subscribers, and it was all just chatter threads that you had to enter, answering some questions to be entered. You had to make a remark. I won something. I was so excited. I've never won anything yarny in my life. So I talked to Kelly. We chatted back and forth on Ravelry. And she's going to put my prize in the mail tomorrow, which will be Monday. And hopefully I'll have it for next week so I can share it with you guys. It's like you're my knitting friends, so I'm excited. It's like I have nobody else I can show it to. So I'm all excited about being able to share it with you all. But I got a project bag, the type that like hangs on your arm so you could walk and knit. So I got one of those. And I couldn't see what the pattern really looked like. It was black and white, and it looked like it had some red in it, maybe, or something. But anyway, there's a project bag. There's 3 skeins of yarn in there. One is 100% alpaca, so I'm expecting that's really going to be soft. And it looks like in the picture, it looks like it might be either like a fuchsia or a rosy color purple. It's hard to tell. A lot of times colors I show you actually look a little bit different when you see them in person. So I'm excited to see that because those are totally my colors. You know me in purples and roses and stuff like that. So there's one of that. There's another skein of yarn that's wool, but I forget what it is. But it's kind of a purpley color too, I think. And then there is a skein of woolen vine yarn. I am so excited with that because because I watch Kristen's podcast, and she's the person that dyes the yarn for Woolen Vine Yarns, and I mean, they sell out as fast as they come up for sale. So I was excited to I'm going to actually own a skein of Woolen Vine yarn. So I am just like over the moon excited at this point. So like I said, when it comes in next week, I will share it with you guys. And yeah, I wish I had feel-o-vision so you guys could feel how soft the yarn is going to be. Because if it's alpaca, I've knitted with alpaca before, and it is so super scrumptious soft. So I'm really excited with that. I have some video news to tell you. If you need things closed captioned, I have fixed that on the channel so that you can watch this in closed captioning. I talked to a lady named Irma Guerrero. Hola, Irma. Irma speaks Spanish, and she asked if I could translate videos for people who didn't speak English. For this channel. You all know me with my Spanish attempts. I don't dare do that. But I did find that there is a little button that I can connect on YouTube that will allow people who are able to translate for whatever language, they're actually able to translate into that language, and it shows up in the closed captioning. So that, and it's free, and I think you get credit if you do that. So I guess there's some people that actually enjoy doing that. If you happen to be one of them and you want to translate my videos in any language you would like to, you're more than welcome to. So anyway, but I have to turn on a button on my channel in order to make that work. So I did do that. So whether that'll happen or not, but the option is there. And I also, if you saw a video I put out earlier this week, it's like 2 minutes long, you might have been wondering, why did she do that, and who is Margaret? There is a channel called Sheepishly Sharing. The lady on it is called Margaret Olander, and I've watched her for years, and she was doing a giveaway for a like crochet and knitting little kit thing, and to do that you had to submit a video showing things that you've made. So the video that went out is actually the submission that I put on her Facebook page onto Sheepishly Sharing. So if you have not checked out her podcast before, she's a lot of fun. She does crocheting, she does sewing, she does knitting, and she also does Addy knitting machines. So if you want to check her out, she's a good one to watch. Her name is Margaret Olander, and her channel is Sheepishly Sharing. And the people that I won the yarn from, they have a yarn shop up in Shelburne, Vermont. And the store is called Must Love Yarn, but their podcast is also called Must Love Yarn. So they're a lot of fun to watch too. It's two women that work. One owns the yarn shop, one works at the yarn shop. So they're a lot of fun to watch. The other thing I changed, if you go into my Ravelry groups, if you've looked at it before, Katrina's Creations is like all squished. Well, it was all squished. You couldn't even read what it says. So I played with that a little bit, and I got it fixed so that the logo for Katrina's Creations over on the Ravelry groups looks a little bit different, but you can at least read it now. So, yes, I've been trying to be tech savvy this week and fix a couple of things. So that's been taken care of. Then I talked to another viewer, and her name is Carol. And Carol, if you're watching, thank you for your suggestion. And she had asked if I would do a shawl tutorial. Now, I've never been able to do a shawl tutorial because most of the shawls that I make come from a written pattern that somebody else has designed and written. So I couldn't do that because I would be violating copyrights. But so that's what I initially told her. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, I have a shawl that I could talk about. And it actually was the very first large project that I ever made. So I'm actually going to talk a little, I can talk about the structure of it because there's nothing copyrighted about it. It was the very first pattern that I did for myself, and it's a wonder it's not dry rotted because it's like 20 years old, but it is made with acrylic. And it's funny, if you're a brand new knitter or crocheter, I think all of us start out doing acrylic, like from Walmart or Joann's or something. When I first started, I just did not understand why people would spend a lot of money on a skein of yarn. I didn't understand the difference between, you know, something that was cheap I could get for a couple of dollars, as opposed to, I was like, why would I want to spend so much money and go get, you know, yarn that at that time was like $8 to $10 a skein, you know, 20 some years ago. So I just didn't understand it. So everything I made when I first started knitting was in acrylic. So when I first learned to knit, I was in Girl Scouts. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and I learned how to knit and crochet for a Girl Scout badge. And then I sat it aside for years because, I mean, the only crocheting I did was granny squares. That's pretty much still what I do. I can do the granny straight blanket. I could make something like that, but fancy stuff, I tend to crochet triangles. One side will be straight, the other side kind of does this, you know, because I tend to increase and lose track of what I'm supposed to have on there. Knitting was kind of the same way. I tended to add and subtract stitches and stick holes in the middle of it. I did yarn overs, and I didn't even know I was doing yarn overs. So when I first learned to knit as an adult, there was a lady at our church who actually worked at a store that's since gone out of business. They did weaving, they did spinning, they had spinning wheels. I mean, they had the great big looms. They had, you know, it was really like a giant toy land for yarn lovers. But like I said, it went out of business. But she worked there, and she taught me kind of how to knit. I was just doing garter stitch, which is just the knit stitch. And I couldn't figure out, when I would look at her knitting, why it looked smooth and mine looked bumpy. And she told me, she says, I'm knitting in stockinette and you're knitting in garter. And I was like, well, what is that? You know. So she explained to me that stockinette stitch is one row is knit, one row is purl, and it makes it smooth, as opposed to every row in the garter stitch or knit stitch, which is therefore bumpy. So that being said, I started experimenting with stitches I was learning. So here is the shawl that I made. It's a triangular shawl, because back then in the 90s, when you said shawl, it was literally a shawl you wrapped around your shoulders. Nowadays, the shawl, what we call shawls to me, are more kerchiefs. They're smaller. They tend to scrunch and wrap around your neck. To me, they're more like a kerchief or a shawlette. But back then, a shawl actually was most of the time triangular or a real long rectangle. And they went completely around your shoulders. So that's how big this one is. I'll hold it up for you. It starts at the end here and goes out. Like I said, it's triangular. I didn't use a pattern with it. What I did, I started at the beginning here, and it's reversible pretty much for the most part, but I started from the bottom up, and I put in, it looks like about 6 or 7 stitches right across here. This is not where I started. I actually started on the body of the shawl. And then if you're familiar with the dishcloth pattern, that is the very basic one, where it's just a square, and at the end of each row you have like a yarn over, and then I think it's 2 stitches. It's been a while since I did that dishcloth pattern. That's all the body of this shawl was. It is, if you look closely, it's just half of a dishcloth, just made bigger. So it would be just a triangle. You can see the yarn overs that I did on the edges. And I just kept making it until it was as wide as I thought I needed it. And it's done in seed stitch. Let me hold this up close so you can see it. Now, seed stitch, this pattern's got a lot of variegation to it, so it doesn't show up real well, but all the seed stitch is one row is knit and then purl, then knit, then purl, and then the row that you come back, you do the opposite. So if you knitted the row before, if you knitted the stitch in the row before, you then purl that stitch. So it creates like a little bumpy surface. It just gives it texture. but all you're doing is knit and purl, and then you just reverse the order of what you did the row before. So the body of this shawl is all done in seed stitch, and the edge right along here is just a yarn over and 2 stitches, and it became a triangle because you increase 1 stitch on each side each row. If I was going to make this a square like I would like for a dishcloth, then you start decreasing, coming back in so it forms the square. So this was just the triangle, but then I realized that it was kind of plain and it wasn't quite long enough. So then I went and I picked up the stitches. This is the back side. Right along here, I picked up all the stitches and I knit a rib stitch. And again, all that is knit, purl, but you do the same thing in each row. So I'm going to, if I went knit, purl, then the next row through I'm going to go knit in the knit stitches, purl in the purl stitches, and it forms a ribbing stitch. It's just a one by one stitch. So it's just knit, purl, all the way across. So that formed a rib stitch, and then I didn't like that for an edge, so I threw in a little bit of crochet, and this is actually called broomstick lace. I'll hold this up close so you can see it. And all broomstick lace is, you pull your stitches through onto a great big knitting needle, like a big broomstick sized knitting needle. And then you pull them off. It looks like I pulled them off in groups of 5. You twist them and you do a chain stitch across the top. So I did that to give it a lacy finish because I didn't know how to do lace back then. So this is my, like I said, this is my very first shawl pattern. I don't tend to wear it all that often just because it is a worsted weight and it can be very warm. And so yeah, I don't wear it. The one thing that's a problem with triangular shawls is as wide as you make them, they go long as well. So in order to make this go around my shoulders, it hangs almost down to my knees. So it's a large shawl. I think it took me 2 or 3 skeins, and it's just red heart yarn. That's all I knew back then. Like I said, I went to my very first sheep and wool festival with this lady, and yeah, that was the first experience I had ever seen with, you know, like wools and cottons, and I knew it was out there, but I just never had seen anything like it, like Angora and alpaca, and I just had no experience whatsoever with that. So I kind of graduated a little bit at a time, and like the first time I bought more expensive yarn, I kind of cringed when I handed the person the money for it, thinking, you know, that's a lot of money to spend for a skein of yarn. Now I understand the difference. You know, and there's nothing wrong with acrylic yarn. If you're using something that you're going to be washing a lot, like baby things, especially baby blankets. All 11 of my grandchildren have gotten baby blankets that are made out of cheap acrylic yarn because I'm not going to be heartbroken if something happens to it. And it's not going to cost me a small fortune if I have to knit a second one, which I've had to do. You know, they've been loved to pieces, and literally, you know, I've had to knit another one for them. So, you know, yeah, there's nothing wrong with acrylic. I just realized I'm wearing only one earring. My earring fell out while I was in the middle of doing the intro, and I forgot to put it back in again. Oh well, sorry for looking lopsided for part of the video. So, and the funny thing with this, you can tell I was still a beginning knitter. If you look closely, where did I see it? Right here. I got a big old hole. And I would like to say that it's due to moths, but it's not. It's due to operator error. But yeah, I wonder how many times I wore this and never even noticed it. So thankfully it's a busy pattern, so it probably didn't show. But that is my first shawl. So that is the extent of my knitting tutorial, to try to explain to somebody. You can just be creative. Like I said, take a dishcloth pattern and just enlarge it. That's all it is, and then just put fancier edging. And you've got a shawl, and it's your own design. So, yeah, so Carol, I hope that helps you. I did do a little research on YouTube, and I found that there are a couple of websites, or a couple of YouTube sites, that explain basic knitting and show stitches, and they're just better tutorials than what I can do. So I am going to put them on the screen right here. They are Goodnight Kisses, RJ Knits, and Nastasia. There's 3 different ones that you could maybe look at and choose to see which one's going to be more helpful. You know, it just depends on which one you kind of feel comfortable looking at and watching, and which one explains it better for you. So hopefully that will help any of the newer knitters and some of us older knitters that need refresher courses every so often. I have to think, now how do I do this stitch, or what exactly am I supposed to do for this stitch or that stitch? And I just type the stitch into YouTube, and usually there's somebody who has done that stitch and I can watch it. I'm a visual learner, where if I read it in a book, I don't grasp it as well as I can if I watch somebody. And that's how I learned to knit, was watching this other lady, watching her knit stitches. That's how I would learn. Or I would get videos out from the library. This is before DVDs were around. I would get videos out from the library and watch how to do it, and then I would hit the pause and do a little bit more and hit the pause, and you know, that's how I learned. So hopefully that's helped any new knitters that are out there. We have some cow news for our knit along. We have one project that is finished, our very first finished object. It was by Jane Dickinson, and her Ravelry name is Daisy Jane. And if you go into the Banner Unfurled pattern page and click under the projects, you'll see it. It shows up there. She used Cascade yarn in blue, white, and chocolate, and it looks really pretty. And she said she's going to make another one at this point for somebody. And so she won the stitch markers for being the first one to post. And she's already received them, because I sent her a message as soon as I saw it pop up. And so yeah, she's already gotten her stitch markers. So congratulations, Jane, and thank you for doing the pattern. And for the rest of you all, the knit along is running until July 30th. I'll announce the winner on July 31st, and the prizes are, I feel like a broken record, but I don't want anybody to miss out that hasn't watched some of the other videos. So it's the project bag, it is stitch markers and a progress keeper, and a skein of primrose yarn in the Blueberry Jazz. So those are the prizes. Now, if you do enter this, don't forget, if you haven't already bought the pattern and you want to do it, use the pattern code KC20, and it will give you 20% off of the Banner Unfurled pattern. So it gets you the pattern for $3.20 instead of $4. So there's also another podcast that is doing a knit along for the same pattern, and that is Three Sisters Knit, and that's another podcast that I watch and have been chatting back and forth with the ladies. It's Sheila and Margaret, and they're up in Canada, and they are having a knit along for the Banner Unfurled pattern. Theirs starts on June 15th. So if you want to enter both, because you could enter mine and enter theirs, but you don't want to start it until June 15th, which is when theirs starts, so you would be eligible for both. They are doing a project bag and a skein of yarn. They also showed on their latest podcast a little notions bag or something they're doing as well. So, yeah, that's one to check out. If you're interested, like I said, you have to go over to their podcast and their Ravelry group page to find out what their requirements are to submit an entry. But theirs is running from June 15th until the end of August. So that's another one. Then I also had somebody ask me a while back about beading. And the pattern for the Banner Unfurled does require some beading. It's not hard to do. But I did a short knitting or beading tutorial on that. So I am going to pop that in right here. Alright, for our beading tutorial, you will need a 0.7 millimeter crochet hook and, of course, the beads. Now, there are several ways that you can bead. You can pre-string your beads onto your thread before you begin your project. The problem is if you're working with a lace weight yarn or a single ply yarn, the stress of sliding the bead back and forth across the yarn can wear the yarn and cause it to break, which I've had happen before. So this is the way I do it and the way I have the instructions written for my pattern Banner Unfurled. You have your left needle and your right needle. If you're going to be knitting the stitch on the left side, you take the crochet hook, you insert it in the hole in the bead like this. You pull the stitch off of the left needle, slide it through the bead, and then just lift that stitch onto the right needle, and then you just continue your next knitting stitch like that. The reason I don't actually knit the stitch that I have the bead on is because it can make the bead or the stitch itself kind of sit up at a funny angle when you come back the second time to do the next row. So I've just found that if I just put it on as a slip stitch with the bead inserted into the slip stitch, it seems to work the best. So that is the knitting or the beading tutorial. Hope it helps. Alright, now on the note of beading, I'd like to show you a couple of books that I've gotten that all have to do with beading, and it is lace beading, so you are using a lace weight yarn with this. I think I've shown these before back when I first started the podcast when I made one of the shawls that I made, but this is one. It's called Wendy Knits Lace. It has beads in the pattern, or in the patterns, and this is done by Wendy D. Johnson, and they're gorgeous. They're very, very pretty. So that's one of the pattern books that has lace that I own. There's lots of them out there, but these are the two that I have used before. And this is the other one, Beaded Lace Knitting. And this is by Anakin Alice. And this has some beautiful patterns as well. And all of them include beading. In fact, here's a picture of Allison, or Anakin on the back. So, those would be the beaded knitting books. And then lastly, I was in the comments page, a lady, one of my subscribers named Kathy, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Tinclair. I'm sorry if I didn't say that right, but she had given me a suggestion, a tip. And you know, I mentioned in last week's video that I really like to do things on the cheap. My kids tease me and say that, you know, I've got cheap plastered on my forehead. And it's the truth, but you know. Anyway, she had told me about keeping stitches on needles. You know, they've got these needle cozies out there and everything. But the tip she gave was absolute genius. So I wanted to share it with everybody because I think it was wonderful. 2 knitting needles, rubber band. How simple is that? Your stitches aren't going anywhere if you just rubber banded your needles together. You know, your stitches are sitting here. Yeah, and it works on circular needles too. I was like, she told me that, I was like, that is so cool. I was totally amazed. It was like such a simple idea, and it worked so well. And I was like, why did it never occur to me? So thank you, Kathy, for your tip, and hopefully everybody else can take advantage of that tip too, because, you know, rubber band, super cheap. We've got them around the house, and you're not going to lose your needles or your knitting off of your needles. I've had so many yarn overs, it never fails. If my stitches fall off, it's never a row that is like knit stitch or something simple like a knit or a purl. I usually intend to lose stitches that have yarn overs all over the place, and then I have to like rip back till I get to a normal row to figure out what it was that jumped ship off of my needles. So yeah, so wonderful tip, rubber bands. So any of you that have tips, please pass them along to us. And I'll share them with everybody, and so we can all benefit from that. And so next week, hopefully my giveaway winter stuff will be in, and I can share it with all of you guys, because like I said, you are my knitting friends. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to that for next week, and I am so looking forward to working on something other than my Find Your Fade. Yes, so that's it for this week, and I will see you again next week. Thanks again for stopping by. If you haven't subscribed yet, click the little red button below. If you liked this video, give me a thumbs up, and have a great week.